They wanted saviors, but Earth sent the wolves of war. The crystalline spires of Ethros Prime reached toward the binary stars like fingers of pure light, their surfaces humming with harmonic frequencies that had maintained peace for 7 millennia. Ambassador Lyrian stood at the apex of the Harmony Tower, her translucent skin shifting through worried hues of amber and violet as she watched the distant explosions bloom across the outer rim. "How many colonies have we lost?" she asked without turning from the viewport. Technician Voss checked his bioluminescent readings, his 6 arms dancing across the living console. 15 worlds in the past lunar cycle, Ambassador. The Drakari hegemony advances without pause or mercy. Lyrian's skin darkened to deep purple, the color of profound grief among her people, the Resonari. For 7,000 years, their civilization had thrived through harmony, cooperation, and the sacred art of sonic manipulation. They had never needed weapons because they had never encountered a species that could not be reasoned with. Until now. "The Drakari do not listen to our songs of peace," Voss continued, his voice carrying the melodic undertones that marked his species. "They consume our settlements, strip our worlds bare, and move on like a plague of locusts. Their ships number in the thousands. And our defense chorus, 30 vessels, all designed for research and exploration. Our sonic disruptors can pacify small creatures, but against armored warships?" Voss let the harmonics trail off into silence. Lyrian pressed her palm against the cool crystal wall, feeling the subtle vibrations of her dying civilization. The Resonari had achieved something remarkable in galactic history, a truly peaceful society that had never known war. Their technology was built for creation, not destruction. Their ships carried instruments of science, not weapons of death. "The ancient summons," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the tower's harmonic hum. Voss's skin flashed bright yellow in shock. "Ambassador, that ritual has not been attempted in 3 millennia. The risks of doing nothing are certain extinction," Lyrian interrupted. "The archive speaks of heroes from distant stars, warriors who answer the call of the innocent. We must try." The summons chamber lay buried beneath the planetary crust, carved from a single massive geode and lined with resonance crystals that could focus thought itself. Ancient Resonari had built it as a theoretical experiment, a way to reach across impossible distances and call for aid. No living being had ever seen it used. Lyrian descended through the spiraling passages, followed by the 12 members of the High Chorus. Each carried a piece of the Greater Harmony, the combined sonic signature of their entire civilization. If the ritual worked, it would broadcast their plea across the galaxy, seeking those brave enough to answer. "The theoretical range is unlimited," explained Elder Kirith, his ancient voice crackling like wind through crystal caves. "But the power required could destabilize our planet's core. We risk everything on a legend." "Then we risk everything," Lyrian replied, taking her position at the chamber's center. The ritual began with a single pure note. Lyrian's voice rose through octaves that most species couldn't perceive, joined by the chorus and harmonies that made the very air shimmer. The chamber's crystals began to glow, amplifying their song until it transcended sound and became something more fundamental, a vibration in the fabric of space itself. Power readings soared beyond anything the Resonari had ever achieved. The crystals sang in frequencies that hurt to hear, their light growing brighter as dimensional barriers began to weaken. Through the growing portal, they could see the void between stars, the vast emptiness where their call for help would travel. "Something is responding," Voss called out, his instruments detecting massive energy signatures. "Multiple contacts, coming fast." The first ship to emerge from the portal was nothing like what the Resonari had expected. Where they had hoped for graceful vessels carrying noble heroes, they saw an angular wedge of dark metal bristling with weapon systems. Gun turrets tracked across the chamber like predator eyes, and armor plating scarred by countless battles told the story of a species that had learned survival through violence. Letters in an unknown script marked the hull, UES Shadowhawk. More ships followed, destroyers, cruisers, and a massive dreadnought that barely fit through the dimensional gateway. Each vessel bore the marks of war, Their designs focused on one thing: dealing death efficiently and surviving the consequences. On the bridge of the Shadowhawk, Admiral Kai Nakamura stared at the tactical display with the cold calculation of a career military officer. One moment his fleet had been patrolling the outer colonies, the next they were in orbit around an unknown world populated by what appeared to be living crystal formations. "Report," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets through 3 major conflicts. "Sir, we're in an uncharted system," replied Lieutenant Commander Zara Okafor, her fingers dancing across the sensor array. "Single inhabited planet, pre-FTL civilization, no hostile contacts detected. However, the energy signatures that pulled us here are still active." "How did we get here?" "Unknown, sir. All ships report the same phenomenon. We were pulled out of hyperspace by some kind of dimensional disturbance. Chief Engineer Holt is running diagnostics now." Nakamura studied the planet below. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. Perfect climate, no signs of industrial pollution, cities that looked more like art installations than urban centers. In his 30 years of military service, he had learned that perfect worlds usually hid perfect threats. "Sir," called Communications Officer Blake Rodriguez, "we're receiving transmissions from the surface. Unknown language, but the translation matrix is working on it." "Any indication of hostile intent?" "Negative, sir. The transmissions seem distressed, almost like a plea for help." Captain Devon Cross entered the bridge, her marine combat armor still bearing scorch marks from their last engagement. "Admiral, my people are ready for immediate deployment. What's our situation?" "Unknown, Captain. Prepare a reconnaissance team, but keep them on standby. I want to know what we're dealing with before we commit ground forces." The translation breakthrough came when the Resonari delegation reached the human fleet. Ambassador Lyrian, despite her terror at the sight of the alien warships, had insisted on personal contact. The Resonari Harmony crystals could interface with almost any technology, and within hours they had established rudimentary communication. "We called for heroes," Lyrian said, her words now clear through the translation matrix. "Our people face extinction. The Drakari Empire sweeps across our worlds like a shadow of death." Admiral Nakamura sat across from the crystalline alien in the Shadowhawk's briefing room, studying her with the same intensity he brought to tactical analysis. "You pulled us here. How?" "Ancient technology. Harmonic resonance across dimensional barriers. We sought those who would stand against darkness, who would protect the innocent." "And you found humans." "We found..." Lyrian paused, her skin shifting through confused colors. "We are not certain what we found. Your vessels are unlike anything in our archives. Built for war, not exploration." "That's because war is what we're good at," Captain Cross interjected. "Your distress call reached the Terran Colonial Defense Force. We're not explorers or diplomats. We're soldiers." Dr. Amara Singh, the fleet xenobiologist, had been studying the Resonari delegation for hours. "Admiral, I need to brief you on what we're dealing with. These beings have never experienced warfare, not in their entire recorded history." "Impossible," Nakamura replied. "Every species fights. It's how evolution works." "Not on their world. Perfect environment, abundant resources, no natural predators. They evolved cooperation instead of competition. Their entire technology base is built around harmony and creation, not destruction." The implications were staggering. A species that had achieved interstellar travel without ever learning to fight was now facing an enemy that specialized in conquest and destruction. "What about the Drakari?" Nakamura asked. "Based on the Resonari's descriptions, they're the opposite extreme. Pure predators evolved for dominance and resource acquisition. They've conquered 47 star systems in the past decade. Numbers? Approximately 3,000 warships, with more being constructed. Their advanced fleet alone outnumbers our task force 20 to 1. Nakamura absorbed this information with the stoic calm that had earned him command of the Colonial Defense Force's most elite unit. The odds were impossible, but he had faced impossible odds before. "Time until they arrive?" "The Resonari estimate 4 days, maybe 5. "Not enough time to evacuate their population, even if we had the ships for it." Nakamura activated the fleet communication system. "All commanding officers to the Shadowhawk for tactical briefing. We have work to do." Captain Jackson Reeves, commanding the destroyer Stormbreaker, was the first to speak when the briefing began. Sir, with respect, we're looking at a suicide mission. 3,000 enemy ships against our 47? 32, corrected Captain Vera Chen from the cruiser Defiance. We lost 15 ships in the Kepler incident, remember? We're not at full strength. The numbers don't matter, said Commander Talon Brooks from the heavy cruiser Vendetta. We've faced worse odds. When? Reeves challenged. Proxima Centauri, Vega 7, the siege of Armstrong Station. Every time someone said it couldn't be done, we did it anyway. Nakamura let his officers debate for a moment before calling for silence. The question isn't whether we can win a conventional engagement. We can't. The question is whether we can make victory so expensive that the enemy abandons their conquest. Chief Engineer Holt spoke up from his position at the tactical display. I've been analyzing the dimensional gateway the Resonari used to bring us here. With some modifications, we might be able to use it as a weapon. Explain. Instead of opening portals to bring things here, we open them to send things away. Specifically, we open them inside enemy ships. The spatial distortion would tear apart anything caught in the field. Risks? The power requirements are enormous. We'd have to tap into the planet's core to generate enough energy, and there's a chance the process could destabilize the entire system. How many shots? Maybe 10 if we're lucky, then the system burns out. Nakamura considered the tactical possibilities. 10 shots against 3,000 ships was still hopeless, but combined with other strategies... Captain Cross, what's the status on your Marines? Ready for anything, sir, but I should mention the Resonari have been sharing their biological data with Dr. Singh. There are some interesting implications for ground combat. Dr. Singh activated a holographic display showing comparative biology. The Resonari evolved in a low-gravity, low-radiation environment. Their biology is incredibly fragile by human standards. But here's the interesting part. The Drakari seem to have similar vulnerabilities. Meaning humans can operate in conditions that would be lethal to both species. We can fight in vacuum, in radiation fields, in environments where the enemy can't survive. The tactical picture began to shift. Instead of a conventional fleet engagement, they could use humanity's greatest advantage, their ability to survive in hostile conditions. Environmental warfare, Nakamura mused. We fight where they can't. The first Drakari scout ships arrived 3 days later, sleek vessels of black metal that moved through space like predatory fish. They conducted a thorough reconnaissance of the system before transmitting their findings back to the main fleet. General Vorthak, commander of the Drakari 3rd Conquest Fleet, received the reports aboard his flagship, the World Eater. The data was troubling. Unknown vessels in orbit around the target world, designs that didn't match any known species in their databases. Analysis of the unknown ships, Vorthak demanded, his scaled hide shifting to the deep red of annoyance. The vessels appear to be military in nature, reported his tactical officer. Heavy armor, multiple weapon systems, but their design philosophy is unusual. Most species build for either speed or overwhelming firepower. These ships seem built for endurance. Endurance? They can absorb massive amounts of damage and continue fighting. Redundant systems, compartmentalized design, multiple layers of armor. They're built by a species that expects to take casualties. Vorthak considered this information. The Drakari had conquered dozens of worlds by using superior technology and overwhelming force. Most species surrendered after the first demonstration of Drakari power. Open a channel to the unknown vessels, he ordered. The transmission reached the Shadowhawk within minutes. The alien that appeared on screen was clearly a predator. Reptilian features, rows of sharp teeth, and eyes that showed no mercy. Unknown vessels, the creature spoke in a harsh, guttural language that the translation matrix struggled to process. You will identify yourselves and withdraw from this system. The Resonari are claimed by the Drakari Empire. Interference will result in your destruction. Nakamura stepped forward, his uniform bearing the insignia of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. I am Admiral Nakamura of the Human Fleet. We have been asked to defend this world, and we will fulfill that obligation. Vorthak studied the human through the communication link. The creature was smaller than a Drakari warrior, with no visible natural weapons, but there was something in its eyes, a cold determination that Vorthak had seen only in apex predators. Human, Vorthak repeated, accessing his databases. We have no record of your species. Are you allies of the Resonari? We are their protectors. Then you will share their fate. The third conquest fleet arrives in 1 day. You have until then to reconsider your position. The transmission ended, leaving Nakamura staring at a dark screen. Around him, the bridge crew continued their preparations with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had faced death before. Admiral, Communications Officer Rodriguez spoke up. We're receiving a transmission from Terran Command. They want to know our status. Nakamura considered his options. He could request reinforcements, but the nearest battle group was 6 months away. He could withdraw and leave the Resonari to their fate, but that went against everything he believed in. Send the following message, he ordered. Colonial Defense Force Task Group 7 has encountered a pre-FTL civilization under attack by hostile forces. We are engaging to protect civilian populations. Expect heavy casualties. Nakamura out. Rodriguez stared at the message. Sir, shouldn't we request reinforcements? There's no time. By the time help arrives, the Resonari will be extinct. Captain Cross had been listening to the exchange. Admiral, my Marines are ready. What are your orders? Prepare for asymmetric warfare, Captain. We're going to show the Drakari what happens when they threaten human allies. The Drakari Third Conquest Fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metal locusts. 3,000 vessels arranged in perfect formation, their black hulls absorbing light and hope in equal measure. At their head, the World Eater stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its weapon systems capable of cracking continents. On the planet's surface, Ambassador Lyrian watched the fleet's arrival through the Harmony Tower's crystal viewports. The sheer scale of the enemy force was overwhelming. More ships than her people had ever imagined could exist in one place. The humans cannot possibly defeat such numbers, Elder Kirith said, his ancient voice heavy with resignation. Perhaps victory is not their goal, Lyrian replied, observing the human fleet's formation. Instead of the defensive position she expected, the human ships were arranged in small, scattered groups, each moving independently. Then what do they seek to accomplish? I believe they seek to make the Drakari pay such a price for victory that the victory becomes meaningless. The first engagement began not with a massive fleet battle, but with a series of surgical strikes. Captain Reeves led a squadron of destroyers against the Drakari supply lines, targeting fuel depots and ammunition carriers rather than warships. Remember, Reeves told his pilots, we're not trying to win a fair fight, we're trying to make them bleed for every meter of space. The human ships moved like a pack of wolves, striking at vulnerable targets and disappearing before the enemy could respond. They used the system's asteroid fields for cover, emerging only long enough to launch their attacks before vanishing again. The first dimensional weapon strike came without warning. Chief Engineer Holt had spent days modifying the Resonari's harmonic technology, turning their instrument of peace into a tool of destruction. The target was a Drakari cruiser that had separated from the main fleet for reconnaissance. The spatial rift opened inside the enemy ship's reactor core. The vessel simply folded in on itself, its hull crumpling like paper as space-time twisted around it. The explosion that followed took 2 neighboring ships with it. Weapon functioning as designed, Holt reported, but the power drain is enormous. We can't sustain this rate of fire. Understood, Nakamura replied. Use them sparingly and only on high-value targets. General Vorthak watched the destruction of his cruiser with growing anger. This was not how warfare was supposed to proceed. The enemy should have met him in honorable combat, fleet against fleet, allowing superior numbers and technology to determine the outcome. Instead, these humans fought like scavengers, striking at weak points and using weapons that violated the natural order of space. Sir, we're detecting energy buildups throughout the system, his sensor operator reported. The humans appear to be mining the asteroid fields. Mining them? Nuclear mines, sir. Thousands of them. They're turning the entire system into a trap. Vorthak's tactical display showed the scope of human preparations. Every asteroid belt, every gas giant's rings, every debris field had been seeded with nuclear explosives. The humans were not trying to defend the planet. They were trying to make the entire system uninhabitable. Clever, Vorthak admitted grudgingly, but ultimately futile. Begin orbital bombardment. If we cannot claim this world intact, we will ensure no one else can have it. The bombardment began with 1,000 energy beams lancing down from orbit. The beams were designed to crack open planetary crust, to boil away atmospheres and reduce civilizations to radioactive ash. They struck the planet's surface and simply disappeared. "What happened?" Vorthak demanded. "The energy is being absorbed somehow," his weapons officer replied, checking his instruments frantically. "The planet's crust is composed of harmonic crystals that are channeling our attacks into the core." On the surface, the Resonari's crystal cities hummed with power as they absorbed the Drakari bombardment. The same technology that had maintained their peaceful civilization for millennia was now protecting them from destruction. The humans knew, Lyrian realized, watching the bombardment fail. They studied our world and understood how to use our own nature as a shield. But the bombardment served another purpose. While the Drakari focused their attention on the planet, human strike teams moved through the fleet like ghosts. Captain Cross led a company of Marines in a series of boarding actions that defied every principle of conventional warfare. Instead of using traditional boarding pods, the Marines approached in stealth shuttles through the debris fields. They cut through enemy hulls using plasma torches and entered the ships like avenging angels. The Marines had been enhanced with combat drugs that allowed them to function in hostile environments. They could survive in vacuum for short periods, fight in radiation fields that would kill most species, and operate in conditions that would disable their enemies. "Target the command ships," Cross ordered over the tactical network. "We don't need to destroy their fleet, we just need to cut off their head." The boarding actions were brutal and swift. Human Marines moved through Drakari vessels like a plague, targeting command centers and critical systems. They used the enemy's own atmosphere against them, venting toxic gases and depressurizing compartments to create confusion and panic. General Vorthak found himself fighting a war unlike any he had experienced. The humans did not seek glorious battle or honorable victory. They sought to make war so terrible, so costly, that the price of conquest exceeded any possible benefit. "Sir, we've lost contact with 12 command ships," his communications officer reported. "The humans have somehow infiltrated our fleet." "How is that possible?" "They're using our own vessels against us. Once they capture a ship, they turn its weapons on neighboring vessels. They're spreading through the fleet like a virus." The tactical display showed the infection spreading. Each captured ship became a weapon pointed at the heart of the Drakari fleet. The humans were using their greatest weakness, their small numbers, as a strength by turning enemy assets to their advantage. "All ships, withdraw to safe distance," Vorthak ordered. "We'll use long-range bombardment to sterilize the entire system." But even that strategy was denied to him. The dimensional weapon struck again, this time targeting the World Eater itself. The spatial rift opened just outside the flagship's main reactor, creating a gravitational anomaly that began pulling the massive vessel apart. "Emergency power," Vorthak commanded, but it was too late. The World Eater's hull buckled under impossible stresses, its armor plating peeling away like flower petals. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. With their commander dead and their flagship destroyed, the Drakari fleet began to fragment. Some ships attempted to continue the attack, but found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The humans had turned the entire system into a weapon, using every asteroid, every gas cloud, every scrap of debris as a tool of war. "This is Admiral Nakamura to all Drakari vessels," came the transmission that finally broke their will. "Your general is dead. Your flagship is destroyed. You have 2 choices. Withdraw from this system and never return, or join your commander in whatever afterlife awaits conquerors." The voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather rather than the destruction of a conquest fleet. That calm was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Within hours, the surviving Drakari ships had fled the system, carrying with them tales of a species that fought like demons and showed no mercy to those who threatened the innocent. Ambassador Lyrian stood once again in the Harmony Tower, but now she was not alone. Admiral Nakamura had joined her, his uniform torn and stained, but his bearing still proud. "Your people are safe," he reported. "The Drakari won't return. Word will spread that this system is protected by humans and that will deter other potential conquerors. At such a cost, Lyrian said, her skin shifting to the deep blue of profound gratitude. Half your fleet is gone. So many of your people died protecting strangers. That's what we do, Nakamura replied simply. We stand between the darkness and those who cannot defend themselves. But why? What do you gain from our survival? Nakamura looked out at the crystal cities below, their lights reflecting the binary stars and patterns of impossible beauty. We gain the knowledge that beauty like this continues to exist in the universe, that harmony and peace are possible, even if we can never achieve them ourselves. The dimensional portal had been stabilized, allowing the surviving human ships to return to their own space. But before they departed, they left behind something more valuable than any treasure. They left behind the knowledge that, somewhere in the galaxy, there were those who would answer when the innocent called for help. Captain Cross made the final preparations for departure, her Marines loading the last of their equipment aboard the shuttles. She had lost a third of her people in the boarding actions, but their sacrifice had saved an entire civilization. Admiral, she said, joining Nakamura at the tower's viewing platform, the Resonari have offered to share their harmonic technology with us. The applications for our own defense could be significant. Declined, Nakamura said firmly. They created that technology for peace. Let them keep it that way. Sir? Some things are too beautiful to be turned into weapons, Captain. Let the Resonari keep their harmony. We'll keep our guns. The human fleet departed as it had arrived, through a dimensional portal that bent space and time to their will. But they left behind more than just grateful allies. They left behind a legend that would spread throughout the galaxy. The story of the species that had answered a call for heroes and delivered something far more terrifying. They had delivered humanity. In the years that followed, the Resonari would rebuild their civilization, but it would never be quite the same. They had seen what war looked like, what courage demanded, what sacrifice meant. Some would say that their innocence was forever lost. Others would argue that they had gained something more valuable than innocence. They had gained the knowledge that in a universe full of predators, there were also those who would hunt the hunters. The Drakari Empire never recovered from the defeat at Athros Prime. The loss of the Third Conquest Fleet broke their expansion, and stories of the human defenders spread throughout their territory. Rebellions began on conquered worlds, inspired by the knowledge that resistance was possible. Within a decade, the Drakari Empire had collapsed, its member worlds either declaring independence or joining defensive alliances that guaranteed mutual protection. The humans had not just saved one world, they had changed the balance of power in an entire sector of the galaxy. Admiral Nakamura returned to Earth with a report that would reshape human understanding of their place in the universe. They were not alone, and they were not the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. But they were something else, something that made other species pause and reconsider their actions. They were the wolves of war, the guardians of the innocent, the species that answered calls for help not with speeches or diplomacy, but with ships and guns and the willingness to die for strangers. And in a galaxy where predators ruled through fear and intimidation, that reputation was more valuable than any weapon. The last transmission from the Resonari came 6 months after the human fleet's departure. It was not a call for help or a request for aid. It was a simple message. Thank you for showing us that heroes are not born from legend. They are forged in fire, shaped by necessity, and defined by their willingness to stand between the darkness and the light. The message ended with coordinates, not to Athros Prime, but to other worlds, other civilizations that had sent their own calls into the void, seeking salvation from those who would destroy them. The wolves of war had found their purpose, and the galaxy would never be the same.